So it is noon, so we will officially get started right now. Hi, everyone. I'm Don Saucier. I'm the Faculty Associate Director of the Teaching and Learning Center, and we're going to begin today's session with a land acknowledgement.
I'm going to share my screen and hopefully sound. Don, can you see what I want you to see? Excellent. Here we go.
As the first land-grant institution established under the 1862 Morrill Act, we acknowledge that the state of Kansas is, historically, home to many native nations, including the Kaw, Osage, and Pawnee, among others. Furthermore, Kansas is the current home to 4 federally recognized native nations: the Prairie Band Potawatomi, the Kickapoo Tribe of Kansas, the Iowa Tribe of Kansas and Nebraska, and the Sac and Fox Nation of Missouri in Kansas and Nebraska.
Many native nations utilize the western plains of Kansas as their hunting grounds, and others, such as the Delaware, were moved through this region during Indian removal efforts to make way for white settlers. It's important to acknowledge this, since the land that serves as the foundation of this institution was, and still is, stolen land.
We remember these truths because K-State's status as a land-grant institution is a story that exists within ongoing settler colonialism, and rests on the dispossession of indigenous peoples and nations from their lands. These truths are often invisible to many. The recognition that K-State's history begins and continues through indigenous contexts is essential.
Please remember
These truths,
because we still remember.
Thank you. You have joined us on our last event of the fall 2023 semester for the Teaching and Learning Center's Professional Development Series. We meet on Wednesdays at 12 noon for synchronous real-time viewing. We also have asynchronous viewing allowable later. So for the wonderful things that we're going to hear in today's event or any of our other events, those will be archived on our TLC webpage for later viewing. So please share that information with colleagues. We'll be launching the schedule for our spring semester pretty soon. It'll also be Wednesday at 12 noon over Zoom throughout the rest of the academic year, and we have a wonderful lineup for you. But today we have a very amazing event that we've been looking forward to, and there's been a lot of interest in. We have Dr. Ryan Staley from the Counseling and Psychological Services Center, and he'll be talking about supporting students and ourselves, what makes this hard, and how do we do it. Dr. Staley, we are so glad you're with us today.
Thanks again for inviting me, and I apologize for having to reschedule. It is that time of year. I work in a health clinic, and I got kids at home, so it was bound to happen. So I'm glad we were able to reschedule for today, and I've been looking forward to the opportunity. Every time I have invitations to come join staff and talk about some of the things that they're dealing with and things that we can offer as far as information and strategies to be helpful to you all as you work with students, such an important role you all play in the lives of students. I certainly welcome that and enjoy the opportunity to connect with people outside of my own kind of silo here. We try not to be so siloed, which happens a lot in universities. And so sometimes it's helpful to be able to get outside these walls and go see what everybody else is up to. So today I just want to do a quick breakdown of what we're going to do. I'm going to try not to be a talking head, but I'm going to be for a little bit of this. I want to make sure to have my preference is to have more kind of interaction. There will be points where I will be asking you for some of your thoughts about some of the things we'll be talking about. I'll do my best to manage the time. When do we want to make sure we're wrapping up? And by that, I mean leaving some questions, Q&A time. So I'll try to get wrapped up around 12:40-ish to leave some time for Q&A. Also, if there's any questions that you have regarding anything that I talk about today, I'm happy to have you email me, rystaley@ksu.edu, if you have any other questions or you want to call. 532-6927 is the main line of the Counseling Center. I'm happy to respond to any of the questions you may have that didn't get answered today. So I'm going to give you a quick breakdown of what we're going to be talking about today, and then we're just going to jump right in. So we're going to start with talking about the rise of mental health challenges among students. That's no secret to anybody. That's not something that you all are probably not already aware of. We'll just give you some data that's been collected from various surveys that have been generated by organizations that are comprised of a collaboration between different researchers from different universities. We'll also talk about kind of the role of faculty in helping support students in their mental health, the challenges you all face having to take that on and take on that onus as if you're not busy enough. And I know these days a lot of us are being asked to do more with less, and that can be a challenge. And so this can feel like another thing to be adding to the table. As important as it is, we all have limits. And so talk a bit about some of those challenges, ways to support the students, things that I've come across in some of my readings, things that as I talk to students that I can share with you about might be helpful. Some of the common indicators of distress. It's helpful for staff to have some sense of that. I imagine you've had some trainings that cover some of that. I won't spend a lot of time on that, but we'll certainly cover some of the overall kind of general things that you can be looking for as it relates to identifying students who are in distress, how to talk to those students, how to make those referrals. And then I want to transition into talking about you all, right? So what are the things? So I'll also give you some information about some of those resources, both campus and outside resources, but also want to end our conversation with the importance of taking care of yourself, right? How do we, in these important roles, function well? Well, that starts with being able to take care of yourself. And there are things that can get in the way of that. There are barriers, right? Just like there are barriers for students to getting access to different resources like mental health. There are going to be barriers for you all to be accessing needed resources and engaging in things that help you take care of yourself. So how you take care of yourself and generating some dialogue around that, and then presenting you with some ideas about that, and kind of wrapping up from there. Any questions before we get rolling? All right, I'm going to do a screen share here with my PowerPoint. I'm just going to give you a warning ahead of time. There is a lot of words on these, and so don't worry about all the words. I'll be summarizing this as I go. I'm not going to be covering everything, but is there somebody that I can send the PowerPoint to if anybody here does want access to the PowerPoint?
Yes, you can send it to me and I'll post it on the website afterwards.
Ashley, I'll send it to you. All right, so here we go. Got it. So let me do a screen share. Yeah, can everybody see that? Sweet. Off we go. All right, mental health on the rise. University counseling directors speak to this, and a lot of kind of articles that engage different university counseling center directors. As I mentioned, an organization, Health Minds study, is a study that is conducted by a team of researchers representing a variety of different universities. And they did a data report to give us a picture of what are some of the things students are struggling with over the last couple of years. And so actually that should say 2022. Apologies for that. So over the last year, 2022 to 2023. So big sample, 76,000 students. And these students that participated completed a variety of different measures of various symptoms like depression, anxiety, eating disorders, substance use. These are measures that have been validated and are used in clinical practice. And this is where they were getting their information from about some of the specific mental health concerns and challenges that students have identified struggling with over the last year. So a good size sample. And so as we look at some of these numbers, again, some may or may not be a surprise to you, but a huge proportion of students responding to these various screeners that I mentioned they're validated and used in clinical practice, indicate challenges with depression. So the two most common, and not just in university counseling centers, but in counseling centers across the board in various settings, working with various ages. Depression and anxiety are the two most common, and subsumed under those different categories of depression and anxiety are other more specific disorders, panic disorder, post-traumatic stress disorder, other types of mood disorders. But not surprisingly, again, depression and anxiety. I think about that, 41% of that 76,000, that is a huge number, 36% self-injury. So by self-injury, we're referring to students that are engaging in harm to themselves without the intention of taking their life. Some common forms of that are cutting, burning, things like that. Suicidal ideation, right? So thoughts of wanting to die or to end your life, 14%, eating disorders, 14%. Among this age group, suicide actually is second or third leading cause of death. And these are things that are, and on top of that, a lot of mental health disorders have their onset in this age range. So 18 to 25, 26. And so this is the kind of age range where you're going to be seeing a lot of the onset of some of these different mental health concerns, in addition to just the different factors that contribute to that being at this stage in their life, right? Lots of life transitions and relationships and identity, career path, clarification, navigating, becoming an adult or transitioning to another stage of adulthood, and the various challenges that go with that. Among students struggling with mental health, and here's a big problem, 45% are not receiving services or treatment. So a good number of students that are reporting some of these mental health struggles are not getting services or help for that. 77% of students reported that emotional and mental health difficulties are impacting their academic performance. Anytime students are coming in here with mental health concerns, more often than not all the time, but more often than not, at some level and in some way, it's impacting their academics. Whether it's attendance, concentration and focus, comprehension, being able to get things completed, turned in on time, time management. Those kinds of things come up quite a bit. Another survey of college students that looked over kind of a span, right? A 14-year span from 2013 to about 2021, 2013 to 2021. Showed 60% of students met criteria for at least one mental health disorder during that 2021 school year, which is a 50% increase from 2013. So again, and more often than not, students that come in that are meeting criteria for one mental health disorder are often meeting criteria for a couple. But over that 13, 14-year span, a 50% increase in students who are endorsing items that are indicative of having met criteria for a mental health disorder. Also, something that I think is important to note too, studies also show that race is affected by mental health as well. We're going to be mindful of that. But white students are just as much, are much more likely to be receiving or seeking services than other race and identities. And one of the things that we try to be mindful of here at our staff, a lot of university counseling center staffs are white. And one of the things that really is something we're trying to work towards is diversifying our staff to better reflect the student body population here at K-State. And so that potentially could be a barrier that comes up when there are people on these mental health staffs that share different identities are really salient to students. Being really mindful of that. So what are the things that get in the way of students seeking resources? A number of things, but some of the things that have been identified in surveys and research, stigma still. So one of the reasons we are experiencing an increased demand is that there has been some work with stigma, right? So stigma has gone down overall, and that's probably accounting for some of the increase in mental health services. Also, that means students are likely receiving services before they get into college, which allows them to be able to transition to college, right? Because they're getting some of those needs met. But stigma still comes up, and it is still a barrier, right? Whether it's, I still get students that come in often that will say, I wanted to figure this out on my own. This is something I feel like I shouldn't need help with. So that idea of stigma towards self. And then, of course, the perceptions they have of what they believe others are viewing them or how they're viewing them, right? that I'm going to be weak. I'm not strong. I just need to pull myself up by my bootstraps. This is something that I just need to buckle down and get to work. And that people will be judging me in some negative way for having sought out mental health services. And I hear that still from students. Insufficient mental health support. So with an increased demand in mental health services, of course, a lot of us can kind of relate to dealing with the reality of doing more with less resources, and that can impact accessibility and availability of mental health services. We at CAPS have adopted a different treatment model that has been implemented. We're in our third year of applying this specific treatment model. It's a step care model. We had a wait list that was a mile long when I first started here about 6 years ago. On my 7th year now. We no longer have a wait list. Students are able to get in usually the same day or within a day or two. And so we've had to be creative, and other universities have had to be creative about their treatment model and how they're increasing accessibility for students. But that still is a challenge. And of course, cost to some students. Our services are, I'll talk more about this later, most of them are covered by their student fees, but some aren't. And we have a lot of students that come in who are not appropriate for our services, meaning they need more than what we're able to provide in our shorter term, kind of more solution focused model. And so when that's the case, we need to get them connected with community resources, and that usually requires insurance. A lot of students are on their parents' insurance, and some of the challenges with that include they don't want maybe their parents to know. Parents may not be supportive of that, or maybe they're underinsured, right? Maybe the insurance doesn't cover as much, or they don't have insurance. So cost, financial cost, in addition to tuition and living expenses and those kinds of things, that becomes quite a burden. And when you're having to prioritize those other things, it's easy for mental health to kind of take a backseat to that. Other barriers that students have identified in other studies: preference for dealing with mental health problems on our own, right? That can speak to maybe some of that stigma. A lack of time, we can all relate to that, right? Like, I don't have time to invest, because it does. It takes a time investment to address these issues. It takes a lot of guts and courage to take that initial step, and then of course the time needed to really get to work on those things. And just being skeptical: is mental health going to be helpful to me? Is this really going to work? I don't know. Do I have the time to invest in something that may not work for me? And I believe that problems maybe will just get better on their own. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes it gets worse. So you all are potentially gatekeepers here, having access to students in the various capacities with which you work with students. So I was mentioning some of those surveys. So surveys of faculty have been conducted, and results I think were pretty interesting, and that really suggests that faculty really have an interest in supporting students and understanding. And we talked about the rise in mental health and some of the growing demand and need for that among students. Faculty are aware of that firsthand. They see the ways that students are struggling. So in this survey, 87% believe student mental health worsened during the pandemic. That's certainly something that faculty that I've talked to have seen. Certainly that's being reflected in the results of this survey. That's certainly been my experience as well. Again, back to the interest in being able to support students in the ways that they can in that role. 73% welcomed additional professional development. Today's a good example of that on the topic, and the interest that you all have demonstrated in the topic of student mental health, and how do we support students in the roles that we're in, respecting those boundaries, while also providing support to students and helping them kind of navigate and address some of their mental health needs. A huge proportion of them, most, have had one-on-one conversations with students in the past month that related to mental health topics or issues. And again, 61% believe it should be mandatory. This is happening enough that it should be mandatory for faculty to receive some basic training in the response to students experiencing mental health distress. What do we do when they come to us? Right? You all are in a unique position to observe students, to see how they're functioning, at least in these kind of this specific domain of their life, which is a big part of their life, a huge domain, an important domain in their life, which makes you a gatekeeper, right? You have you lay eyes on them, they're on your radar, and you get to observe how they're doing in these different capacities within which you're working with students. And students, and this is true of a lot of people, even not just students, tend to seek help for mental health concerns. First with non-professionals, so be clergy, family, friends, could be teachers and faculty, right? They tend to be, again, the frontline people that students and really others, and not just college students, others go to for that first line of kind of help and support for mental health concerns. And again, as faculty, you're often part of that group of gatekeepers. So some of the things that I'm learning in some of my reading and as I've talked and interacted with staff members about the challenges you all face in supporting students and as well as yourself. So again, feeling ill-equipped to help students with mental health. What do I do? How do I help them? What resources are there? What are the best ways to engage with this student that both respect important boundaries around what I can and can't do or should or shouldn't do in this situation, but also is supporting this student. It requires a lot more time sometimes to support students on top of an already busy schedule. We kind of mentioned that earlier. Increasing expectations from university administration and leaders and even students to address mental health of the students, right? So there's this growing expectation and maybe intensifying expectation that you be part of that. And the reality is we do have to make this a team effort. It isn't just the counseling center. There are many students who don't come to us and who kind of fly under the radar, and it becomes a team effort that we all in our respective roles figure out how do we effectively support student mental health within the context of the type of work we're doing with these students, right? So you're not going to be their counselor. That's not your job, but maybe your job is to listen, help them feel. And really a big part of what's therapeutic for students is to be able to have contact with somebody who hears them, validates them, and gets them. Why is that important? Because now they don't feel so alone. They have somebody they feel understands what's going on and can support them. And that loneliness, that isolation, that's a huge part of the distress students are feeling. I can't tell you how many times students tell me that they're scared to talk to their professors about what's going on because of what might happen. Remember that stigma, how other people may respond or think of them if they're having mental health concerns, or maybe they think they're just being irresponsible. They have all these kind of anxious thoughts about what might happen if I share this with my professor. Lack of support for their own mental health and well-being, right? Being able to have time to address that in your work and outside of work. Feeling of responsibility to help students, and sometimes that can feel burdensome. Also, and I thought was interesting and important to note, some of the surveys indicated a large number of Latinx and Black faculty believe that institutions are hostile or somewhat hostile towards students of color, which certainly can impact their confidence in being able to refer students to resources that are going to be helpful to these students, right? And can maybe lead to them feeling faculty who hold those identities, maybe feeling some even more burden and responsibility for helping support these students with mental health because of concern that they're not going to get maybe the support that they may need in these other resources across the community of the university community. And faculty also revealed that many believe supporting students' mental health is taking a toll on their own health, right? Like when we're helping people, that sometimes can have an adverse effect on us, depending on the type of support we're offering, the boundaries that we're trying to have in place as we conduct that work. And again, that busy schedule that everybody's already trying to manage. And so it becomes one more thing that I have to attend to and lose less time for maybe some other things that are important for me to engage in to help restore me, rejuvenate me, keep me healthy so that I'm functioning optimally in the important roles that I'm assuming at work and in our personal lives. So I'm curious, before I talk about some of the things that I've come across that can be helpful for faculty to do, what are some of the things you all have done to support students. That seems to work. What have you learned about what doesn't work? So I wanted to take a break from talking for a minute and open it up for some discussion.
So Ryan, I'll chime in and say that I'm a big fan of making resources available, not just at the beginning of the semester, but at the midpoint and the end of the semester too, when students might be experiencing concerns.
Yeah. I can't tell you how many students are not aware of the resources that are out there. It's shocking to me at times. But the more I see it, the less shocking it is. So yeah, that's going to be important. Providing some of that information, getting them exposed to that. What else?
So I can give you a couple of the responses from the chat as well.
Sure.
One person said to normalize, validate, offer flexibility and deadlines without making them ask. Another person said they've been horrified to hear how many faculty blatantly ignore students' disability accommodations, even when they are documented. And someone else said talking about it with the entire class.
Talking about it with the entire class. The importance of mental health and self-care. Yeah, those are all things that I think are great. That flexibility, the response with sensitivity and understanding, taking the student at their word. It's not to challenge whether or not there's validity to what they're saying, right? To acknowledge it, right? To recognize, hey, this is something that's impacting you. This is something that we need to address, and it's contributed to you not being able to be the student you want to be, or the student that is able to do well in this class. What can we do to support you? And so, yeah, what are some things that don't work, or maybe some things that you found have not been helpful? Well, one of them was maybe mentioned, right? Just invalidating, not believing maybe the student, or not being willing to kind of be sensitive to and willing to accommodate when there's already documented need. What else?
I think sometimes, Ron, we feel like we can handle it. That it's just a conversation of with a someone's sharing something with us, and we think, oh, we'll just be a listening ear and we'll handle it, and not recognizing that we're not the professional that maybe they need to be talking to.
Yeah. Yeah, so learning when it's time to make that referral, right? Sometimes that may be what's needed, is that conversation, some acknowledgement, some validation. Let's game plan together about what we can do to support you in this specific class. But sometimes it's, how do I know when it's time to refer a student to other resources like CAPS or other resources across the campus and Manhattan community. So being able to make that distinction. Others.
And if you want to put something in the chat, I'll read it out loud for you if you're not in a position to unmute yourself.
Thank you for moving that.
Sure.
So Ryan, this is Tim Boldman, physics. I would say something that has mixed success is using sort of the student of concern process. And some of the mixed success is due to the fact that it really comes down to as simple as hours being misaligned. I mean, roughly speaking, I would say counseling service is sort of a 8-5 operation, whereas we have high stress activities that might go into 7:30 Friday evenings, and then if you do a report, it doesn't come back till Monday, and it creates some concerns.
Yeah, there's a lag time there, right? And
yeah.
Mention. Just so you're aware, we'll talk about this later. Students can actually have 24/7 access to a counselor over the phone by contacting CAPS. So if they were to contact us after, that's where a lot of the crisis appointments happen, right? I mean, experiences, mental health emergencies don't just fall between 8 and 5. In fact, oftentimes weekends, after hours, at night. If a student was to call our number, they can elect to speak with a counselor over the phone to talk about what's going on. And of course, there are other TELUS, student health support is another resource that's 24/7. Of course, there are some Manhattan community resources as well, specifically as it relates to mental health. So there's definitely there's definitely a need for that, and there are some resources for that. But yeah, that's concerning to think, okay, we don't get to this until 3 or 4 days later, in terms of action being taken. That definitely would be concerning.
Ryan, someone notes in the chat that CAPS cannot always meet complex and chronic student mental health needs, which can be demoralizing.
Yeah, it's for us too. I mean, part of the boundary that we have to set is being realistic about the type and level of support we can offer a student with great need. Right. I think many of the students we are able to keep in-house, but there are some that we're not able to adequately meet their treatment needs because of the nature of the problem or the severity of the problem, both. And when that happens, CAPS assumes a different role. And one of the things that would be helpful maybe for you all to know is that we have recently hired a case manager who is part of their responsibility is to help get students connected and provide ongoing support as a bridge of care to community providers. And that's something that as CAPS clinicians, we try to be really sensitive to. So it's not like we make a referral and then off you go, you're on your own. There very much is our responsibility and our role changes in terms of what we're offering the student. So we may not be their ongoing clinician, but we will be providing clinical support as they are getting connected to these different resources and facilitating that connection, as well as addressing any immediate needs and concerns that are coming up during that kind of interim between the time that they started with us and then getting connected with other resources. So that's something we're happy about. We actually started last year offering that service, and now have hired a full-time person to kind of step into that role. But yeah, that demoralizing.
And Ryan, we have one more comment in the chat. Someone notes that resources are not as robust or as easily accessible for distance or global campus students.
That's very true. Yeah. We offer a variety of different services. One of those is our workshops. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but those are held over Zoom. But yeah, that definitely is a need. I think it would be important for us to kind of consider how do we meet the needs of those kind of distance learning students, because one of the challenges we have here is that we, as clinicians, we're all licensed to practice within the state of Kansas. We do offer with established clients telehealth services if that's available. We also offer, I mentioned the workshops are held via Zoom, and these are all secure Zoom platforms. As long as the students are within the state of Kansas. For any students that are outside of the state of Kansas, again, that becomes a legal and ethical challenge because we're not licensed in some of those different jurisdictions. But yeah, I think we're going to have to figure out creative ways to support the needs of those students. And that's been brought up before as well. All right, so some of the things that you've already mentioned are already on this list. Being flexible about deadlines as appropriate and needed, of course, within reason, but can we do that? When students are communicating personal challenges, mental health challenges that are getting in the way, to be sensitive to that, to be open to hearing ways that's been impacting their work specifically in your class, and being willing to be flexible with deadlines as needed. Even including, so now we want to promote an environment that values help seeking, that values self-care and mental health. What are the ways we can do that as faculty, right? Including statements in your core syllabus about mental health, right? It helps set that expectation, normalize the need to seek help. It highlights the link, right, that you're aware of between mental health and academic performance. It just sends an important message that this matters, and it matters because we want you to be healthy people as well as healthy students, and those are inextricably connected, right? And so having statements about mental health in the course syllabus can be helpful. Again, it sends a clear message. Offering mental health days, build that into course requirements, make that maybe an assignment, something that kind of no questions asked. Everybody's afforded a mental health day to promote well-being, and again, sending that message that taking care of yourself has to come first before you're able to function well as a student. providing students with information about those campus resources, as well as community resources. Consider having some of these people from these different departments come in and speak for 10 or 15 minutes at the beginning of a class to talk about what they do and the services they offer. We often will have various campus partners that we work with come to our staff meetings and refresh our memory on what they provide students. Similarly, that could be something that faculty maybe emphasize and prioritize building into maybe some lecture time or some class time. Being open about again, to the extent that you're comfortable being open about your own efforts to care for yourself, right? Like, these are things I have to do when I'm having a hard time. I talk to friends, I take jogs, I do, some enjoyable activity that restores me. That self-disclosure provides a good model of ways to cope with challenges. Students, again, are learning how to function with less support than they've had before and more responsibility than they're used to taking on, particularly the undergraduate students, as they transition to this kind of important developmental stage where they're becoming adults and more responsible for some of their own life management. So providing, again, good examples and models of ways to deal with challenges, and also modeling the importance of seeking help, right? That notion that I got to figure this out on my own is where a lot of times we all get in trouble when we're not willing to admit that or acknowledge that, I'm at a point where what I'm dealing with is beyond kind of what I'm able to do on my own. And I'm needing some help with that, to be able to kind of share your own stories about times when you've been able to do that and how helpful that's been. Establishing class conditions and norms that are conducive to self-care, right? So maybe not having deadlines or due dates at midnight, having them more maybe at 5 o'clock. Again, some of the other things mentioned already, mental health days, flexible deadlines, things like that. And then, of course, knowing the common signs of students' distress and helping them get connected with appropriate resources and services, and being willing to talk openly about concerns that you may have with students. Having those direct conversations with them. And we'll talk more about that here in the next couple minutes. So those are some things that you all have already identified, and maybe some other things to think about. And this isn't just during finals time, really. These are things you want to be doing from the right out of the gate with students in your classes. So common indicators of distress. This is not an exhaustive list, and I'm challenging you to think about in your own mind, maybe students that you've had some concerns about. What are the things that were concerning? What were the things that contributed to your concern for this student? What were the things that you noticed, right? So how does the student present? What's their hygiene looking like, right? What's their academic performance been? Have you noticed a change, right? Attendance going down. They often feel stressed and overwhelmed, right? You see the furrowed brow and kind of a restlessness that is often there. I mean, we all can kind of relate to hitting that place at times, but if that's consistently happening. Fatigue, you're noticing a dramatic weight loss or gain, a lot of kind of tired, slower movements, or even hurried movements that are kind of more sped up, that are uncharacteristic of this person. Intense emotional reactions, requesting a lot of support that's maybe in excess of what is typically needed for a student in your course. Anger outbursts, agitation, disruptive behavior in the class, disjointed thoughts, right? The way they're communicating seems not logically connected, not so coherent. That potentially could be an indicator of some maybe substance use or mental health concerns. Rapid or slowed speech, right? Tearfulness, conveying challenges with feelings of hopelessness or helplessness. Noticing the student being more withdrawn or isolated, particularly if that's a change from what you've noticed before. The student's more engaged and more actively connected with you and other students. And again, dramatic mood changes, right? Noticing kind of this rapid and significant fluctuation in mood. Also, if students are conveying in various ways, whether directly or indirectly in writing or verbally, thoughts about wanting to die or not be here anymore or not exist, or maybe even threats to others, right? If there's any indicator through some of the things they're saying or doing that may suggest that there's a potential danger to somebody else, and those are things you want to be paying attention to. What are some other things that you all have noticed when you're concerned about a student? What are the things that stick out for you?
So Ryan, there's a couple questions in the chat. One person said, and this is an interesting answer to your question right now, is another indicator is nothing. So many humans hide and seem like they're coping.
Yeah. Some are pretty good at masking it, but usually it'll come out in some other ways. It's not so obvious, especially when you get a big class. There's no expectation that you're going to be, completely attuned to every student, and sometimes they're good at kind of falling under the radar.
So someone asked, this is related but doesn't answer your question. What might indicators look like for an online class? It's hard to know what's going on if there's no direct interaction with students and they just stop turning in work with no explanation.
Yeah, well, the fact that they're not turning in work would probably be the obvious one. It can be a little harder, and it depends on kind of the online, the Zoom etiquette that you've established for your class. Is it that everybody be present and be showing themselves? Are they allowed to not have video going while they're engaged in the class? So yeah, it definitely presents maybe some challenges with kind of identifying those things that may be easier to pick up on in person versus online. So what are the other indicators? Again, that academic performance. Also, if other students or other faculty or staff are indicating concerns about this student, those are also indicators, right? Other people are seeing or noticing some of those things. Poor performance, poor attendance, a change in the level of engagement with respect to the student in your particular class. Those are all things you want to be paying attention to as well. How are they interacting with you? How are they interacting with the other students, even online? What are you noticing? Are there things that get your attention and that seem to be happening repeatedly, right? That we're establishing kind of a pattern here. But yeah, sometimes that can present some challenges when you're not physically there with them.
The person extends their question by saying that their class is asynchronous, so there is no Zoom and no real-time interaction.
Yeah, so you're limited in terms of your exposure to them. So it just have to be attending to the other things that you are exposed to or do have contact with, like turning in assignments, how they're doing on those assignments. What are they communicating in those maybe written assignments too that could be potentially concerning. So yeah, just the information that you are able to get, being attentive to red flags that there may be something going on here.
An interesting comment in response to that chat was that someone said maybe incorporating asynchronous video comments into course requirements can help to connect to students a little bit more deeply.
Yeah, I think a lot of this is as we have new modes of instruction, right? New modes of engagement with students. It does require some creativity with respect to how we can continue to stay kind of tuned in to how students are doing. And I think ideas like that and others, not being in the academic realm, certainly I'm limited in terms of maybe what are some of those possibilities, but being able to brainstorm what are some ways that we can stay connected enough to be able to have a sense of how a student's doing. What are the ways that we can go about doing that and sharing that with each other as a faculty group, because that's one of the things that's going to be important for your own care is to be communicating with each other, consulting with each other about what you're noticing and ways to maybe be able to handle some of these things. So I want to transition really quickly as I'm mindful of the time that seems to just fly by. So how to talk to students of concern. If you have a student that you are concerned about and you do want to talk to them, or think it would be important to check in with them, this is a good kind of breakdown of some different components to effectively talking with a student about that. So you want to do it in private, right? At a time where you have sufficient time to be able to talk as much as possible, right? I know that again, schedules are busy, but as much as possible, choosing a time for both of you where you don't have to feel rushed. You want to be direct, right? In terms of your observations, right? Comment about behaviors, reducing or even eliminating any comments that suggest judgment. It's more, this is what I'm noticing, this is what I'm observing, and this is why I have the concern. I've noticed you've missed class lately. I've noticed that the assignments haven't been turned in, or that your grade is slipping. I've noticed you often you look tired when you come in, and it seems like you may have trouble focusing, or maybe that was something that they wrote on an assignment that you were concerned about and wanted to follow up. I've noticed, I observed, I've seen this, and these are the reasons I'm concerned. And then being able to listen. And so the listening part is so key, right? So listening with sensitivity, validation, right? It makes sense, given what you're sharing, why you're feeling that way. The empathy, right? So being able to put yourself in their shoes, and doing so, because you're in a position of authority, in a position where you're assessing these students, it's already a vulnerable place to be as a student, really wanting to be sensitive to that power differential as you're communicating with this student about some already personal and vulnerable struggles that they probably feel a lot of shame or maybe guilt about, or a lot of anxiety about. Communicating with them your understanding of what's going on. So you want to paraphrase, kind of put in your own words what you're hearing them say to you, to make sure that you've got it right. And when you're conveying an understanding of what's happening, the student feels a whole lot less alone. And given assurance, right? Given some hope that there are ways to help. That may be things that you can do in the moment that you help with them as it relates to the class specifically, or if this is something that you've determined, okay, this is kind of out of my purview of skills and responsibilities, and in terms of being able to effectively help the student with these issues, then here are some resources on campus. Here are some resources as far as community that we can give you. There is help though, right? And I can assist you in maybe trying to get connected to some of these resources, or get you connected with people who can further help you get connected to other resources. Identifying the options for action, exploring those possible consequences, right? Being able to problem solve with them, right? What's going on? But maintaining clear boundaries, right? Again, this is what clear, consistent boundaries around expectations, around your role with them in terms of what you can and can't do. Be direct and honest with your student about your ability to help. You can't guarantee confidentiality as it relates to, things of risk concerns or concerns about safety. You want to be clear about that, and that you're clear about what you can and can't do. It's also helpful to know your departmental guidelines or protocols or policies around working with distressed students or students that you have concerns about. And then refer when their problem is more serious, or you feel like you've done all you can to help with this student with this challenge, and they may need additional resources or expertise beyond what you can provide. Then we talk about referral. So I want to talk a little bit about CAPS and ways that you can. So when mental health becomes something that a student is clearly presenting with, providing them with some information about CAPS. Here there is help, and one of the resources here we have on campus is CAPS. And CAPS is our counseling center here that provides support to students who are struggling with mental health concerns. This is how you get set up with them. So the first step would be providing the student with the information about CAPS and the ways that we can be helpful. So we provide individual, group, consultation services, crisis services, and it starts with a walk-in appointment. And so if it's not an urgent situation with this student, you can let them know that if you are interested in going to CAPS, I think that they could be helpful for you to talk further about what's going on and things that could be helpful in addressing those concerns. Between 8 and 5, we have consultation or walk-in appointments. And the student comes to CAPS, they'll come to the front desk, they'll let the front desk person know that they want to meet with one of our providers today to talk about what's going on. They'll then be given a brief screener that gives us some information to help determine which clinician the student will likely be meeting with. Essentially, that is, are they going to be meeting with a counselor to do a consultation appointment, or are they going to be meeting with our crisis counselor to talk about maybe some risk concerns that were identified in that survey? And then they'll have some other surveys that they'll complete. And then they will either meet with the clinician then or schedule a time later that day to meet with the clinician to talk about their presenting concerns, what are their immediate concerns, and a plan for addressing those concerns. And that can include services we provide at CAPS, services that are provided by other campus resources, or sometimes community resources and services as well. So that's the entry into our system at this point. And sometimes it's helpful for students to be walked over. Sometimes it's helpful for you to call CAPS. If you're sending a student over, it's not uncommon for a faculty or staff member to contact us and say, hey, here's a student that I'm sending over. This is the reason I've recommended that they seek your services. They may or may not come, but it's helpful for us. We obviously, if the student came, we couldn't confirm that without a release of information, but we can always receive information and then document that in the student's record so that we have that information if the student does come in. So a little bit about us. Again, we're located in Lafayette. We're at the lower level of Lafayette. Our entrance actually faces Platt Street, which runs perpendicular to Sunset, has some Greek houses across the street. If they were to come in through the main entrance of CAPS, they would be directed downstairs. So either way would be fine. I mentioned individual group skills workshops. The student fees cover most of the services with the exception of ADHD evaluations. Their students are afforded 8 individual sessions per semester. So theoretically 24 a year, as long as they're enrolled. And I mentioned mental health support's available 24/7. If they call our number, that number there, they can elect to speak with a counselor. And here's a list of some of the campus resources that many of you, I hope, are aware of. If not, our campus resource wheel has a lot of those same resources as well as some community resources as well. But what about you? And as I'm looking at the time, what are the ways to care for yourself? What are some things that you do to care for yourself? What are the things maybe that get in the way of caring for yourself? And what have you tried to overcome some of those barriers? If I could just open it up for a minute or two to hear from you, and then kind of wrap up with some things that I could share with you as well.
I'll chime in and say that time is always an issue.
Yeah. That's everybody that I've talked to, whether it's students or just, colleagues, loved ones, the time to be able to do the things I need to do to take care of myself. A good question to ask, though, is what happens when I don't do that, when I don't make that a priority? And sometimes we forget that needs to be considered as well. But time is a big one.
One thing that I did this semester that I initially thought I was doing it for students, but it also helped myself, was that in the beginning of the semester, since I teach the final year students, and we talked a lot about how stressful the process before graduation and finishing and defending is, I said that I usually, when I feel stressed out, I make the time to do some deep breathing, like 2-minute deep breathing during the day. And I said, if you want, we can do it in the beginning of each session for 2 minutes. And they said, yes, let's try. And then actually they liked it. And we used to do it every week before starting the class. And then while I was doing it myself in the beginning of the class, I felt like I was more like relaxed during the class too. And it's also helped me too. And I felt like even if they don't want it, I really want it.
Doing this for me. Yeah, that is a great idea. And I've heard others, sometimes we've done that at our own staff meetings, ended with, or began with, a relaxation exercise or a meditative exercise. What a great idea. Again, promoting self-care in the class is a great example of modeling that. And that helps you as well. When I'm doing those kinds of things with students, I often will say, I'm doing this with you. I like to do this as well. It's helpful for me, and you shouldn't be having all the fun here. So I'm going to be doing this with you. What a great example.
Ryan, some other people in the chat have noticed, talked about going for walks during the day, noontime yoga, relaxation exercises, sleep exercise. So it looks like a lot of things are going on in the chat regarding that. Someone indicated a barrier, saying that if sometimes the students feel safe with an instructor to talk about mental health, which is great, they end up extensively sharing traumatic experiences, which can be challenging to handle at times, as much as we want to be supportive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, and that's, one of those situations where, again, there can be the validation, but also setting a boundary in terms of, I hear that, how painful that experience has been, and kind of shifting to, so there's the validation and the shift to referring, and there's help, to address that. And I want to be respectful of that, because I know talking about this can be really activating, and I hear how important it is for you. And there's some good resources here on campus that would be maybe better equipped than I would to be able to help you further discuss that. It sounds like that's something really important to you. So let me tell you about CAPS, right? Let me tell you about some of these other resources and how you can get connected with them. And so sometimes practicing some things that you can kind of say or talk about with the ways you can talk with students about what's going on when it feels like it's going in a direction that may be beyond what you feel comfortable handling, or that maybe doesn't feel appropriate to the situation. Again, finding ways to gently bring it back and shift to, and here's some help, starting with that validation. Really, the best thing that you can do, because a lot of the distress that students are feeling and that people in general experience is related to feeling isolated and alone, and that people don't understand, don't get it, and don't care. You listening with sensitivity, respect, and caring, conveying that with your ability to kind of communicate what you're understanding about how they're feeling and the reasons they're feeling that way, is dramatically therapeutic for students, because they, one, realize that I'm not alone. I don't have to carry this all by myself. Somebody else gets it and understands, and that somebody does care, and there is hope. And so one of the most important things that you do is just to be able to listen, convey that caring and understanding about what's going on, and then talk about strategies for helping that student. So some of the things you've already mentioned: sleep, eat, move. People take that for granted. When we talk about mental health, we have to talk about physical health too, right? Which includes sleep and moving your body and putting good fuel in your body. Sometimes we take that for granted. Don't skip meals, right? Time management. How do I prioritize? And so sometimes that priority list has to have at the top of that me, right? Engaging in relaxing, restorative, rejuvenating activities. Oftentimes, and I hear this with students, I struggle with it myself at times, we will spend time checking out, right? We'll scroll, we'll mindlessly do things, which doesn't take any more energy out of the tank, which is what we're avoiding, but it doesn't restore us. It doesn't put more energy in the tank. So you want to be taking breaks. You want to be engaging mindfully in things that are going to restore and fill the tank up, not just keep it from emptying more, right? And that means doing meaningful things and figuring out what gets in my way of prioritizing these important activities for me, because everything that you're already doing that's hard is going to be a lot harder if you're not mentally and physically healthy. It's going to be hard to focus and concentrate. It's going to take longer to get things done. I'm not going to feel as good about my work. The quality of the work won't be as good as it could be, which I don't feel good about that. For us to be able to function as well as we want to be able to function in these roles, we have to take care of ourselves. It has to be a priority. What can I do to remind myself of that? What can I do to make sure that I'm building that time into my schedule? So again, what are the barriers? How can I overcome those barriers? Because this is a priority. I care about my students. I care about me, and I got to care about me, right? That kind of analogy of who, when cabin pressure is lost, who has to put the mask on first, right? Mom or dad, and then we help the kids, right? So you got to be putting your mask on first. You got to be starting the class with mindful meditation. You got to be getting sleep. You got to be doing things that help you to be as effective as you can be. And in so doing, you're modeling that for students, and you're going to be better equipped to help them when they're struggling. Don't hesitate to use colleagues, other professional resources for you. You have an EAP program. I have highlighted there in bold a link to information about the EAP program. Engaging in those relaxation exercises, doing that with students, it's helpful for you to do that. That was a great example earlier. Setting boundaries with others in various domains of your life, being able to say no and say yes. Sometimes saying yes is restorative. Sometimes saying no is protecting that time so that you're able to do the things you need to do to take care of yourself, and practice mindfulness. When we're changing our relationship with our experience, we're more accepting of ourselves and more accepting of some of the difficult emotions and challenges we're facing in a way that helps us to not push away or get caught up in emotions or the challenges that relate to that, but help us to gain some perspective, to better understand, using those emotions to better understand what's going on and respond with intentionality, right? To be able to be aware of what's happening, notice that, and be able to respond with intentionality that's guided by personal values. Very important. And those are my references.
So Ryan, at this point, we are past time. So I would like the audience to help me thank you for the wonderful comments that you shared with us today. We will put a post-event survey available for you to provide feedback on this. We also have professional development certificates and fellows that can be earned, and my colleagues will drop that information into the chat. I'll remind you that Dr. Staley was willing to handle our questions later by email or by calling caps, I believe you said would be appropriate as well. So, and we will also post this presentation as well as the slides that Dr. Staley shares with us on our website at the TLC. So thank you again so much, Dr. Staley, for sharing these comments with us. It's very important to support the mental health of our students, and I really appreciate you also taking our mental health into account too. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Take care.